Thanks to OPPO for sponsoring this video. When it comes to gaming on a mid-range phone, there are usually trade-offs that you just have to make, where you either can't get the high-end performance and frame rates that the flagships give you, or if a mid-ranger is somehow able to deliver higher FPS, it usually can't sustain it for very long, with the phones getting hot and thermal throttling, causing lag and frame drops, not to mention the battery draining like there's no tomorrow. But with the Reno13 series, OPPO seems to be pulling off a little bit of magic, or what they call AI HyperBoost, where leveraging a custom version of the Dimensity 8350 that they actually co-developed with Murrieta, not only is OPPO claiming that the AI can help supported games run smoothly with stability for like hours and hours on end, but in a couple of them like PUBG and Mobile Legends, they can even deliver up to 120 FPS while using less battery, which almost sounds too good to be true. So today we are testing it with this first challenge, seeing if those stability claims can live up to the hype. So we programmed our robots to play Mobile Legends in the exact same way on both the Reno13 and the iPhone 16. We calibrated for things like the screen and set the games to the same 60 FPS, since that's the max that the iPhone allows for, while getting detailed frame rate data using a tool called PerfDog. Now OPPO is saying that with AI HyperBoost, the phone manages its system resources to optimize for things like temperature and frame rates, which we're really pushing to the limit here, gaming for 8 consecutive hours, where the results are interesting. So over those 8 hours, the Reno averaged a flat 60 FPS, while the iPhone 16 was only slightly lower at 59.2, which honestly doesn't really sound like that big of a difference. But when you delve deeper into the data, you realize that the average FPS isn't actually telling the whole story, since most of the time, the iPhone was actually running at 60 FPS, with what led to the iPhone's lower average score being hundreds of these little instances where it dropped frames, sometimes going as low as 46 frames in a second, which is what you experience as stuttering and jank. Whereas on the OPPO, it was pretty much rock solid all the way through. Obviously, this is just one game that OPPO specifically optimized for, so it's not going to be representative of all games, but I still think it's a pretty impressive showcase of what they're pulling off here. But it's the adaptive frame booster that I'm actually more interested in checking out, because what this tech does is really smart. So it takes a game's native frame rate, let's say it's 60 frames a second, and then it calculates new intermediate frames to fit in between those native ones, allowing you to get 120 frames per second in a game like PUBG, where normally that just wouldn't be possible on a mid-range phone like this. And it looks pretty good. You can see how the AI is adding completely new frames in this slow-mo footage that PUBG itself isn't rendering. It's all the AI here, with the net effect of it being a significantly smoother gaming experience, which I think on a mid-range phone like this gives you options that you normally don't have, where you can either play at 120 for the smoothest experience, or you can choose to crank up the graphics higher than you usually would while still getting a totally playable FPS. But even when the Reno13 can run a game at native 120, like in Mobile Legends, there are still reasons to set it to 60 and then use adaptive frame booster instead, with the first one being battery life. When we played Mobile Legends for 2 hours with frame booster on at 120 versus 2 hours at native 120, the frame boosted version used significantly less battery, draining by only 23% compared to the 28-point drop when rendering it natively. And then the second reason for going frame boosted are the temperatures, where in those same 2-hour sessions, with frame boosting, the phone ran about 1.5 degrees Celsius cooler, which could help further reduce any kind of potential stutters or jitters due to throttling. But even without frame boosting, against the iPhone 16 with its flagship A18 chip, AI HyperBoost helped the Reno13 outperform at 60 Hz, with the OPPO not only running cooler, with it measuring around 4 degrees Celsius lower than the iPhone after just an hour of gameplay, but over the full 2 hours of testing, it also used up less battery as well. Now, the advantage of extra battery life is obvious, right? But I think the cooler temperatures are probably just as important when it comes to gaming, because it's when a phone gets hot that it starts to stutter, as we saw in the iPhone stability test, and it could lead to things like the screen dimming where the phone has to drop its screen brightness in order to compensate. But because the Reno13's temps stay cool, you get the same smooth and stable experience all the way through. Now, that's not to say that this AI HyperBoost tech is perfect, right? Like, it only works in the handful of games that OPPO optimized for, and at least when frame boosting, it can also introduce artifacts, since ultimately the AI is just guessing at what those boosted frames should look like. And unlike a native 120 frame rate, the game engine isn't actually updating 120 times a second. So touch latency isn't going to be as fast as it would be when you run it at 120 natively, but at least in the way OPPO implemented it here, it isn't introducing delays either, with it getting the same latency in our tests compared to the native 60 FPS. But something the Reno excels at in any game, regardless of whether or not it supports AI HyperBoost, is network latency, with this phone having 11 integrated antennas, which combined with what OPPO is calling AI link boost that they say intelligently switches between those antennas when you're holding it in landscape, can help reduce latency by up to 35%. They even have a feature where it actually tells you like the best position to face when using the phone, and at least when we did the speed tests against the iPhone 16, it definitely outperformed. We tested them outside in 2 different locations on a mobile connection, with the Reno achieving a lower average latency pretty much across the board, which, at least in the context of a game, the lower latency and the faster upload and download speeds can definitely give you a competitive advantage. And then beyond just pure performance, the Reno 13 and the 13 Pro come with some other features that help improve the general gaming experience overall. They of course both come with 120Hz displays with these really nice and thin bezels. They have improved cooling with larger vapor chambers, the speakers have been improved, and they're also using OPPO's really well-tuned OHaptics haptic system, which makes everything feel a little bit more natural, which altogether I think makes these pretty compelling phones. Like obviously most of the AI benefits are going to be limited to the titles that OPPO supports, which to be honest isn't many right now, so hopefully OPPO can support more in the future. But I don't know, I just like the idea of using AI to boost performance so that way you don't have to pay for more expensive hardware if you don't really need it. And I hope more companies start doing this. Anyways, that is pretty much it for me in this video. Big thanks again to OPPO for sponsoring this showcase. Thank you guys for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the very next episode.